The sun hangs low over the Iraqi desert, casting long shadows across the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. Here, beneath the shifting sands, lie thousands of clay fragments etched with the oldest writing known to man. These tablets do not just record grain harvests or royal decrees. They tell a story of a beginning that defies modern biology. The cuneiform script whispers of a time when the sky and earth were one, and a specialized race of beings sought to ease their burden. In the city of Nippur, archaeologists uncover verses describing a deliberate act of creation. It is a narrative where humanity is not the product of random evolution, but the result of a calculated design. As we decode these ancient lines, a haunting question emerges. Were we born of nature, or were we built for a specific, divine labor that has long been forgotten? The sun hangs heavy and unrelenting over the vast, scorched plains of southern Iraq. Here, in the cradle of the world, the wind carries the fine, golden dust of empires long since returned to the earth. It is a landscape of silence, where the horizon shimmers with the heat of 1,000 forgotten summers. Beneath this desolate surface lies a ghost, a civilization so ancient that its name was lost to the memory of man for nearly 2,000 years. This is Sumer. It is a place where the history of the human race does not merely begin, but where it was written down in a language of wedges and lines, pressed into the very earth itself. In the mid-19th century, the world looks upon these mounds of dirt and rubble with a sense of indifference. To the local Bedouin, they are merely hills of debris. To the early European explorers, they are potential treasure troves of gold and statues. But as the first shovels pierce the hardened crust of the Mesopotamian soil, they do not find the glittering wealth of kings. Instead, they find something far more profound and, for many, deeply unsettling. They find a mountain of clay, thousands upon thousands of tablets, many no larger than a human hand, begin to emerge from the darkness of the earth. They are the contents of the great library of Ashurbanipal and the temple archives of cities like Nippur and Uar. These are not just records of grain shipments or tax receipts, though those exist in abundance. Among the mundane accounts of a growing society, there are stories, there are hymns, there are detailed descriptions of the cosmos that should not exist in the hands of a people living 5,000 years ago. The script is cuneiform, a complex system of wedge-shaped impressions that at first defies all attempts at translation. It looks more like the frantic scratching of birds than a sophisticated language. Scholars in London and Paris toil under the flickering light of oil lamps, trying to find the key to this ancient code. When the breakthrough finally comes, the whispers in the clay begin to speak. At first, they tell of a great flood, a story that mirrors the biblical narrative of Noah with such chilling precision that it sends shockwaves through the Victorian world. But as the translation continues, a darker and more complex narrative begins to take shape. The tablets do not speak of a singular, benevolent creator who spoke the world into existence with a breath of love. They speak of the Anunnaki. The word literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. These beings are described not as ethereal spirits or allegorical symbols, but as physical entities with needs, flaws, and a hierarchy of power that mirrors a military command. They are the protagonists of a story that challenges every foundational belief of modern anthropology. As we look closer at the texts known as the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish, the observational eye of history reveals a startling proposition. The Sumerians do not claim they evolved from the primates of the wild. They do not claim they were the accidental byproduct of a chaotic universe. They state, with the cold clarity of a government report, that humanity was a deliberate project. We were an addition to the world, a biological solution to a very specific problem faced by these visitors from above. The setting of this ancient drama is the Abzu, a region often identified with southern Africa or the deep underground mines of the ancient world. The tablets describe a time when only the gods walked the earth. These lower-ranking deities, the Ijiji, were tasked with the grueling labor of maintaining the planet. They dug the canals that fed the rivers. They mined the precious metals that the High Lords of the Anunnaki required. For 40 periods, the length of which remains a subject of intense debate among chronologists, the Ijiji endured this toil. But the tablets record a rebellion. The labor was too great. The heat of the earth and the weight of the picks broke the spirit of these lesser gods. They burned their tools. They surrounded the palace of Enlil, the supreme commander of the mission, and demanded an end to their servitude. It is at this precise moment in the Sumerian record that the concept of the human being is born. Enki, the Lord of Wisdom and the Master of the Deep Waters, proposes a radical solution. He suggests the creation of a primitive worker, a being that can take the yoke of the gods upon its shoulders. This is not described as an act of divine magic, but as a process of blending. The tablets speak of the blood of a god mixed with the clay of the earth. In the sterile, clinical language of the modern world, we might call this genetic engineering. In the world of the Sumerian scribe, it was the birth of the Lulu, the mixed one. The records are hauntingly specific about the difficulty of this process. The first attempts are failures. The tablets describe beings that cannot breathe, creatures with malformed limbs, and entities that lack the capacity for procreation. It is a trial and error process that looks less like a miracle and more like a laboratory experiment. The goddess Ninhursag, the chief medical officer of the Anunnaki, works alongside Enki, refining the formula, adjusting the essence until finally a perfect worker is produced. This worker, the first human, is designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to serve. We were built to be the hands that dig the trenches and the backs that carry the stone. The Sumerian term for worship or the service of the gods is the same word used for labor. To the ancient mind, there was no distinction between religious devotion and industrial work. We were the biological machinery of a superior race. This realization, hidden for millennia beneath the desert sands, presents a terrifying prospect. If the Sumerian tablets are a factual record rather than a collection of myths, then the very essence of human identity is built upon a foundation of servitude. We are not the masters of our destiny, but the legacy of a corporate restructuring of the planet that took place before recorded time. The Orthodox archaeological community views these stories as colorful metaphors, a way for an early civilization to explain the hardships of life and the majesty of the heavens. They point to the lack of physical evidence for the Anunnaki themselves. Where are their machines? Where are their cities of steel? But the proponents of the forbidden records point to the tablets themselves as the evidence. The sheer detail of the descriptions, the consistency of the narrative across thousands of miles and centuries of time, and the advanced astronomical knowledge contained within the script suggest a source of information that exceeds the capabilities of a primitive society. The Sumerians knew the color of Neptune, a planet invisible to the naked eye. They knew the composition of the solar system, placing the sun at the center long before Copernicus was born. They spoke of the wandering planet Nibiru and its long elliptical orbit. If they were right about the stars, why would they be wrong about their own origin? As the sun sets over the ruins of Nineveh, the shadows of the excavation trenches grow long and deep. The clay tablets, now housed in the climate-controlled rooms of museums or tucked away in the private collections of the elite, continue to whisper. They tell of a time when the sky was filled with chariots of fire and the earth was a workshop for the gods. They speak of a secret history that has been systematically ignored or suppressed because it threatens the very structure of our modern world. The rediscoveries made in the 19th and 20th centuries were not just academic milestones. They were the uncovering of a forbidden truth. The records suggest that we are a species with amnesia, living in the ruins of a much larger and more terrifying story. We walk the streets of our modern cities, oblivious to the possibility that our DNA carries the mark of an ancient manufacture. In the next stage of our investigation, we must look closer at the tablets themselves. We must examine the specific instructions for our creation and the strange, high-technology descriptions that the Sumerians used to describe the tools of their creators. The whispers in the clay are growing louder, and the story they tell is one that may redefine what it means to be human. We are moving beyond the veil of myth and into the realm of a forgotten reality, where the line between God and engineer is blurred into non-existence. This is the record of our making, and the purpose for which we were called into being remains written in the dust of the Mesopotamian plain, waiting for those with the courage to read it. The sky over the ancient Near East is not a void but a bridge. Across the vast silence of the cosmos, the Sumerian scribes describe a movement that defies the isolation of the early world. They speak of the Anunnaki. This term, translated literally as those who from heaven to earth came, carries a weight that shifts the very foundation of human history as we understand it. They do not arrive as gods in the ephemeral sense of modern religion, but as physical entities with a specific destination and a clear objective. The tablets tell us that they descend onto the marshy plains of the Delta, where the Tigris and the Euphrates meet the Persian Gulf, long before the first city of man rises from the silt. The world they find is a primordial wilderness. There are no roads, no temples, and no grand monuments. The landscape is a sprawling expanse of reeds and shifting waters. According to the Sumerian texts, the arrival is not a singular event but a planned expedition. We see the first of these beings, Enki, the lord of the earth and the master of the deep waters, establishing the very first settlement. He names it Eridu, which means the house built far away or the place of the descent. It is a lonely outpost on the edge of a world that is yet to be tamed. In the silence of this early era, Enki and his crew begin the monumental task of terraforming. This is the true golden age of the gods. It is a time when the earth is inhabited only by these extraterrestrial visitors and the native flora and fauna of the planet. The tablets describe Enki clearing the riverbeds, directing the flow of the life-giving waters, and setting the foundations for a civilization that would eventually span the globe. But this work is not an act of benevolence for a human race that does not yet exist. It is a functional, industrial necessity. The social structure of the Anunnaki is as rigid as the architecture they bring with them. At the pinnacle of this hierarchy is Anu, the father of the gods, who remains in his celestial abode, overseeing the broader mission from a distance. On the surface of the earth, the administration is divided between his two sons. Enlil, the lord of the command, is the stern administrator and military leader. He is responsible for the law, the execution of the decrees, and the overall success of the mission. His brother Enki is the visionary, the scientist, and the diplomat. He is the one who understands the hidden codes of life and the intricate mechanics of the natural world. The tension between these two brothers is a recurring theme in the tablets. Enlil is focused on the mission and the efficiency of the operation, while Enki often shows a deeper curiosity and perhaps a growing affection for the world they are reshaping. This division of power sets the stage for everything that follows. The mission of the Anunnaki is not a spiritual quest but a resource-gathering operation. Modern researchers and alternative historians, analyzing the lists of materials and the descriptions of the early cities, suggest that the target of this expedition is gold. This is not gold for currency or jewelry. In the context of the high technology hinted at in the texts, gold is a vital physical element. It is a perfect conductor, a reflector of radiation, and a stable metal that does not corrode. The theory suggests that the Anunnaki atmosphere on their home world was thinning, and they required suspended gold particles to create a shield to preserve their life. Whether this interpretation is literal or symbolic, the tablets are clear about one thing. The work is exhausting. To carry out the heavy labor of mining and irrigation, a lower class of beings is employed. These are the Ijiji. They are the rank and file, the workers of the heavens who find themselves burdened with the backbreaking task of digging the rivers and extracting the ores from the depths of the earth. For 40 periods, a measurement of time that remains debated by scholars, the Ijiji toil in the sun and the dark of the mines. They are the ones who feel the weight of the Golden Age most heavily. As we look through the lens of the tablets, we see a world of industry. This is not a pastoral paradise. It is a construction site of global proportions. The Ijiji are tasked with creating the infrastructure that will allow the Anunnaki to thrive. They dig the Tigris and the Euphrates, shaping the very geography of the Middle East to suit the needs of their masters. But as the centuries pass, the grumbling begins. The toil is too great. The burden is too heavy. The Sumerian account known as the Atrahasis provides a vivid description of this unrest. The Ijiji decide they can no longer endure the hardship. They burn their tools and their baskets. They march in the darkness toward the temple of Enlil, surrounding it in a show of defiance. This is the first labor strike in history, and it is a strike against the gods themselves. The air is thick with tension as Enlil wakes to find his residence besieged by his own workers. The council of the gods is called. Anu descends from the heavens to mediate the crisis. The Ijiji speak of their exhaustion and their refusal to continue the work. Enlil is furious, demanding that the leaders of the rebellion be punished. But Enki, the scientist and the wise one, sees a different path. He understands that the work must be done, but he also recognizes that the workers have reached their limit. It is in this moment of crisis that the most significant decision in the history of the Earth is made. Enki proposes a solution that will change the course of evolution forever. He speaks of a being that already exists upon the Earth, a creature of the wild that has the potential for more. He suggests that the Anunnaki can create a substitute, a worker who will take on the yoke of the Ijiji and carry the burden of the gods. This is the moment where the descent of the Anunnaki shifts from a colonial expedition to a biological experiment. The proposal is met with both interest and skepticism. To create this new worker, they will need to combine the essence of the gods with the essence of the earthly being. This is the beginning of the engineering of humanity. It is not an act of creation out of nothingness, but a sophisticated manipulation of existing life. The tablets describe the involvement of Ninhursag, the chief medical officer and mother goddess, who works alongside Enki in a place called the House of Fashioning. We are presented with a vision of a laboratory rather than a temple. There are descriptions of vats of purified blood and of the clay of the earth. In the terminology of the ancient scribes, these may be the closest words they had to describe genetic material, test tubes, and biological incubators. They seek to create a creature that can hold a tool, follow a command, and reproduce, yet will remain subservient to the architects who designed it. The golden age of the gods walking alone is coming to an end. The transition is marked by the sound of heartbeat and the first breath of a new kind of life. The Anunnaki are no longer just visitors or miners. They are now creators. They have taken the raw materials of the earth and the sophisticated knowledge of their own race to forge a servant. This being, the Adamu, is the result of a cosmic necessity, born from a labor dispute in the heart of the Mesopotamian plain. As the experiment begins, the first models are not perfect. The tablets tell of various attempts that did not meet the requirements, creatures with defects or strange features. These are the forgotten prototypes of the human race. But eventually, Enki and Ninhursag achieve the desired result. A being is born that possesses the intelligence of the gods but the physical stamina for the earth. This is the bridge between the heavens and the dust. The Anunnaki look upon their work and see that it is functional. The burden is shifted. The Igigi are relieved of their toil, and the new workers are sent into the fields and the mines. The cities of the gods, which were once silent and exclusive, now begin to hum with the activity of a new species. This is the dawn of the human story as recorded in the Sumerian tablets. It is a story that begins with a purpose, a specific role in an industrial machine that spans the stars. The architectural beauty of the Sumerian cities, with their towering ziggurats and complex waterways, is the backdrop for this new era. The Anunnaki remain as the masters, the architects, and the kings. They provide the laws, the language, and the technology, ensuring that their new creation remains productive. The Golden Age has transformed into an age of administration. We are left to wonder about the nature of this relationship. Was it a partnership, or was it a form of sophisticated domesticating of a new species? The evidence of this descent and the subsequent engineering remains etched in the clay. Every city founded by the Anunnaki was a center of specialized knowledge, from the astronomy of Sipar to the medical science of Shuruppak. They were the teachers, but they were also the taskmasters. The purpose for which we were designed was clear in their eyes. We were the solution to a crisis, the silent laborers in a project that far exceeded our understanding. As we look at the ruins of these ancient sites today, the silence is profound. The gods have departed, but the structures they designed and the genetic legacy they left behind remain. The story of the Anunnaki descent is the story of how the wild earth was brought into the fold of a cosmic order. It is a story of architects who looked at a planet and saw a resource, and who looked at a primitive creature and saw a tool. The Golden Age was the era of the masters, and the age that followed would be the age of the engineered. In the shadows of the Mesopotamian dawn, the first humans began their long journey of service, unaware of the celestial drama that had called them into existence. This was the beginning of our world, built on the foundations of a mission from the stars. The passage of time in the ancient world is not measured in years or decades, but in the slow, grinding movement of geological change. According to the Sumerian texts, specifically the Epic of Atrahasis, the Anunnaki have been on Earth for a period of time that defies human comprehension. For 40 periods, a measurement that some scholars interpret as thousands of years, the heavy lifting of the colonial effort falls not to the high lords of the pantheon, but to a secondary class of divine beings known as the Igigi. These are the rank and file of the heavens. They are the builders, the diggers, and the maintainers of the infrastructure required to sustain the gods in this harsh, primitive environment. They are tasked with a monumental project, the excavation of the great rivers. The Tigris and the Euphrates do not simply exist in this narrative. They are described as engineered channels, carved out of the stubborn earth by the hands of the Igigi. The air is thick with the heat of the Mesopotamian sun, and the work is relentless. Every day, the Ijiji descend into the trenches, their hands blistered by tools made of divine materials, their backs strained by the weight of the soil. They are gods, yet they live the lives of beasts of burden. They clear the silt, they reinforce the banks, and they ensure the flow of water to the growing settlements. For millennia, this is the order of the world. Resentment is a slow-burning fire. It begins as a murmur in the barracks and grows into a roar that echoes through the valleys. The Ijiji have reached their breaking point. They look at the high gods, the Anunnaki like Enlil and Anu, who live in the comfort of their temples and celestial palaces, and they decide that they will no longer bear the yoke. This is the first recorded labor strike in history, etched onto clay tablets 3.5 millennia ago. The text describes a scene of mounting tension where the workers begin to question the necessity of their suffering. Why should they, who also possess the spark of divinity, be the only ones to bleed for the sake of the mission? The sun sets on a day that would change the trajectory of the planet. Under the cover of darkness, the Ijiji gather in secret. They do not pick up their shovels for the morning shift. Instead, they gather their tools and cast them into the fire. The flames lick at the wooden handles and the bronze blades, a symbolic destruction of their servitude. In a coordinated movement, they march toward the sanctuary of Enlil, the Eker in the city of Nippur. Their voices rise in a rhythmic chant of defiance, a sound that carries across the silent plains of Mesopotamia. Enlil is the lord of the wind and the air, a stern and often volatile deity. He is asleep in his temple when the sound of the mob reaches his ears. He awakens to a sight that would chill even a god. His palace is surrounded. The torches of the Ijiji illuminate the night, casting long, dancing shadows against the temple walls. This is not a request for negotiation. It is a siege. The guards at the gate are terrified, and Enlil himself is gripped by a cold realization. The backbone of his workforce has snapped. He is trapped, forced to confront the reality of a workforce that has finally said no. Inside the temple, Enlil summons his advisors. He is furious, demanding that the leaders of the rebellion be brought to him in chains. He views the mutiny as a threat to the natural order, an affront to the authority of the Anunnaki. He sends his gatekeeper, Kalkal, to demand an explanation. The Ijiji respond with a clarity that leaves no room for debate. They declare that the labor is too great, the toil is excessive, and the distress has broken them. They are finished with the digging. They are finished with the rivers. Panic spreads through the divine hierarchy. A call goes out to the highest reaches of the heavens. Anu, the supreme ruler and father of the gods, descends from his celestial abode to the earth. Enki, the master of wisdom and the lord of the sweet waters, arrives from the abyss of the Abzu. The great gods gather in an emergency session to address the crisis. The atmosphere in the council chamber is heavy with the scent of incense and the weight of an uncertain future. Enlil remains adamant, calling for a violent suppression of the revolt. He wants the Ijiji punished, their spirits broken so they might return to the trenches. But Anu is more perceptive. He listens to the grievances of the Ijiji, which are relayed to him by the messengers. He looks at the reports of the labor they have performed, the vast quantities of earth they have moved, and the years they have spent in the heat. He realizes that their complaint is just, the work is indeed too heavy for any divine being to endure indefinitely. If the mission on Earth is to continue, if the resources are to be extracted and the environment tamed, a new solution must be found. The gods cannot be the ones to do the manual labor. It is beneath their dignity, and as the mutiny has proven, it is unsustainable. It is here that Enki, the great scientist and manipulator of life, steps forward. He has been observing the indigenous life forms of the planet, the primitive hominids that roam the wild, surviving on the fringes of the divine settlements. He proposes a radical idea that will alter the fate of the solar system. Why not create a substitute? He suggests the creation of a worker, a creature that possesses the intelligence to follow instructions and the physical endurance to handle the labor, but without the status or the longevity of a god. He calls this proposed being the Lulu, which translates roughly to a primitive or a mixed one. The assembly is intrigued but skeptical. How does one create a being capable of serving the gods from the raw materials of the earth? Enki explains that it will require a blending of essences. This is where the Sumerian account takes a turn into what modern observers might describe as complex genetic engineering. Enki demands the sacrifice of one of the gods to provide the necessary biological blueprint. They choose a deity named Geshtui, a figure described as having intelligence and a disciplined mind. He is sacrificed, and his blood and spirit are mixed with the clay of the earth. This clay is not merely mud in the context of the myth. It represents the biological material of the planet, the existing DNA of the native inhabitants. The goddess Belaili, also known as Ninhursag, the mother of the womb, is called upon to assist Enki in this delicate operation. In her laboratory, a place the texts call the House of Shims, the work begins. The process is described with meticulous detail. Ninhursag prepares the mixture, ensuring the proportions are exact. She pinches off 14 pieces of the clay mixture, symbolizing the creation of 7 males and 7 females to ensure the new species can propagate itself. The text describes a period of gestation, an incubation that takes place outside of the natural order. For 9 months, the creation is nurtured in what could be interpreted as artificial wombs or the bodies of surrogate birth mothers among the goddesses. When the time is right, the first humans are brought forth. They are not the result of slow, accidental evolution, but of a deliberate, calculated act of bioengineering designed for a specific purpose. They are the answer to a labor crisis. When the first workers are finally presented to the Ijiji, the tension that has gripped the heavens begins to dissipate. The burden is officially transferred. The Ijiji are released from their toil, returning to their higher-level supervisory roles, or retreating back to the celestial realms. Mankind is now the primary workforce of the planet. We were designed to be the hands of the gods, to dig the canals, to plant the crops, and to ensure that the masters of the earth never had to lift a finger in manual labor again. The Sumerian tablets do not paint a picture of a benevolent creator molding humanity out of love. Instead, they depict a cold, pragmatic solution to a resource management problem. We were created because the gods were tired. We were engineered because a rebellion forced the hand of the elite. This narrative suggests that our civilization, our cities, and our very biology are the legacy of an ancient labor strike. The infrastructure of our world was built on the sweat of the Ijiji and finalized by the creation of a servant race. As the first humans took up the tools abandoned by their creators, the era of the gods transitioned into the era of man, but the chains of that original purpose remained firmly in place. This was the birth of the human worker, a being fashioned in the image of the divine but destined for the soil. Deep in the heart of the Eridu temple complex, the atmosphere shifts from the industrial to the experimental. Enki, known to the Sumerians as the Lord of the Earth and the Master of Subterranean Waters, is not merely a ruler. He is an engineer of the highest order. The tablets describe him as a figure of immense complexity, holding secrets that even the highest of the Anunnaki regard with suspicion. While the assembly of gods demands a solution to their labor crisis, Enki envisions something more than a mere beast of burden. He looks at the primitive hominids already roaming the marshlands of the Tigris and Euphrates, and he sees a biological scaffold. The tablets speak of a place called the Bit Shimti, the house where the breath of life is breathed in. This is no ordinary workshop. It is described with a precision that haunts modern researchers. The air is thick with the scent of ozone and dampened earth. Here, Enki is joined by Ninhursag, the mother goddess, a figure often associated with medical knowledge and the very fabric of birth. Together, they embark on a project that will alter the course of terrestrial history forever. The task is to create the Lulu, the mixed one, a being that possesses the strength of the earth and the intellect of the heavens. The Sumerian word for clay is Tiat. In many interpretations of these ancient texts, scholars point out the phonetic similarity to words describing that which contains life. When the tablets describe the mixing of the clay with the blood of a sacrifice god named Weila, the imagery is strikingly similar to what we now understand as genetic splicing. This divine blood is not merely a liquid, but a carrier of the Teema, the memory or the personality of the celestial beings. It is the catalyst that will bridge the vast evolutionary gap between the wild creature and the sentient servant. The process described in the Atrahasis is painstaking. It is not a sudden magic trick, but a biological labor. Enki and Ninhursag are depicted working with purification baths and vats of biological matter. They are purifying the essence. The text suggests that the genetic material of the god is fused with the biological foundation of the existing hominid. This is the forbidden blueprint. It is a modification of the natural order, an intervention in the slow crawl of evolution to create a shortcut. The goal is to produce a creature capable of understanding instructions, maintaining the complex irrigation systems of the gods, and performing the rituals required to keep the celestial masters fed and honored. However, the path to perfection is riddled with anomalies. The tablets recount a period of trial and error that mirrors the modern scientific method. We read of beings born without the ability to grasp, or with eyes that do not see the light of the sun. There are descriptions of creatures with misaligned limbs, internal organs that fail to function, and fractured minds. These are the discarded prototypes of the human race, the remnants of a divine experiment that had not yet found its balance. Enki and Ninhursag persevere, adjusting the proportions of the divine and the terrestrial, seeking a vessel that can withstand the weight of a soul while maintaining the physical durability required to till the earth. This experimentation takes place in the Abzu, Enki's secluded domain. It is a realm of deep waters and hidden knowledge, away from the prying eyes of the other gods. The secrecy of the operation suggests that Enki is operating on the edge of what is permitted. While the Anunnaki Council authorized the creation of a worker, the level of sophistication Enki is embedding into the blueprint goes beyond the original mandate. He is not just making a tool. He is making a cousin to the gods. Across the great hall of the gods, Enlil watches with growing unease. For him, the creation of the Lulu is a dangerous transgression. He views the project not as a triumph of ingenuity, but as a potential threat to the cosmic order. By giving the worker the spark of divine intellect, Enki is creating a being that might one day question its masters. This tension between the two brothers forms the backbone of the Sumerian creation narrative. It is a conflict between the need for utility and the fear of a sentient creation. Enlil fears that once the genetic catalyst is released, it can never be recalled. The tablets then describe a moment of profound transformation. After 7 failed attempts, a new being stands. It possesses the upright posture of the gods and the nimble fingers required for the harvest. But more importantly, it possesses the capacity for speech and the ability to comprehend the divine will. The goddess Ninhursag holds the newborn creature aloft and cries out that her hands have made it. This is the Adamu, the first successful model of the engineered human. This Adamu is the biological bridge. He is the first to carry the hybrid signature of Earth and the stars. The genetic catalyst provided by the blood of Weyla has taken hold. The primitive nature of the hominid has been overwritten by a sophisticated cognitive architecture. This being can count the stars, measure the rise of the rivers, and build temples that align with the movements of the planets. He is the perfect servant because he shares the mind of his master. Yet, the blueprint contains a deliberate limitation. The tablets are clear that while the humans were given the wisdom of the gods, they were not given their longevity. The gift of life was filtered through the lens of mortality. This was the compromise that allowed the project to continue. The humans would be intelligent enough to work and to worship, but they would remain tethered to the cycle of the earth, ensuring they could never rise to challenge the Anunnaki in the halls of the heavens. As the first generation of these engineered workers is deployed into the fields of Eden, the impact is immediate. The labor of the gods is lifted. The irrigation canals are dug with precision, and the temples rise toward the sky with a speed never before seen. The world is being reshaped by the hands of this new species. But the genetic catalyst has a secondary effect that Enki may have secretly intended. The humans are not static. They are capable of learning, of feeling, and of reproducing. The tablets describe how the humans began to multiply. The genetic blueprint proved to be incredibly robust. Soon, the quiet valleys of Mesopotamia were filled with the sound of human voices. This expansion was not just numerical, it was cultural. The humans began to form their own societies, mirroring the hierarchies they saw in their divine creators. They were a reflection of the gods, living in a world of dust and toil, yet dreaming of the celestial heights from which their genetic essence had descended. This era of the genetic catalyst marks the transition from the age of the gods to the age of the hybrid. The forbidden blueprint had worked too well. The humans were no longer just a workforce. They were a burgeoning civilization. They began to develop their own desires, their own stories, and their own prayers. They were becoming more than the sum of their parts. The divine blood within them was a constant hum, a biological memory of a home they had never seen. In the shadows of the temples, the priests recorded these events on cylinders of clay, preserving the memory of the house of Shimti and the work of Enki and Ninhursag. They wrote of the mixing of the essences and the birth of the first man. These accounts were not seen as myths by the Sumerians, but as a technical history of their origins. They understood themselves to be a product of design, a species created for a purpose, carrying within their very cells the blueprint of the divine. The tension between Enki and Enlil reached a breaking point as the human population grew. Enlil complained that the noise of humanity was preventing him from sleeping. This noise was not just sound, it was the burgeoning consciousness of a race that was beginning to realize its own potential. The genetic catalyst had ignited a fire that could not be easily extinguished. The human worker was no longer just a silent shadow in the fields. He was a being with a voice, a mind, and a destiny that was increasingly decoupled from the immediate needs of the Anunnaki. Enki, the master architect, watched his creation with a mixture of pride and caution. He had given them the fire of the gods, but he had also placed them in a world of limitation. He had created a paradox, a being of two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The forbidden blueprint was now the reality of the Earth. The genetic catalyst had transformed a wild planet into a managed garden, and the humans were the gardeners. But as the tablets suggest, the gods were beginning to realize that their servants were far more complicated than they had ever anticipated. The stage was set for a confrontation between the creators who feared their creation and the creation that was slowly waking up to its own power. Within the cuneiform inscriptions of the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish lies a term that challenges the very foundation of our biological identity. Lulu Amalu. In the ancient Sumerian tongue, this translates to the mixed worker or the primitive worker. It is a title that carries the weight of a manufactured legacy. As the labor strike of the lower gods, the Ijiji, reaches a breaking point, the leadership of the Anunnaki faces an existential threat. The mines of the Abzu are silent. The irrigation canals of Mesopotamia are clogging with silt. The gold, required for the preservation of their own atmosphere or the status of their civilization, remains locked deep within the earth. It is here, in the midst of a looming insurrection, that the god Enki offers a solution that is as radical as it is disturbing. He does not propose more machines or better tools. He proposes a new kind of biology. The tablets describe a scene of intense deliberation among the ruling council. Enki, the master of water and wisdom, speaks to the assembly of the great gods. He tells them that the creature they need already exists. It is a being that wanders the plains of East Africa, a hominid that is already part of the terrestrial ecosystem, but lacks the intelligence and the manual dexterity required for the complex tasks of the gods. This creature, according to the texts, is the hominid we might recognize today as Homo erectus. It is a being of nature, yet it possesses a spark that Enki believes can be fanned into a flame. The proposal is not to create life from nothing, but to bind the image of the gods onto a creature that already exists. This is the moment of the great intervention. To understand the Lulu Amalu, one must look at the specific language used in the tablets to describe the creation process. The texts do not speak of magic or divine breath in the way later religious traditions might. Instead, they speak of a physical, almost industrial process. Enki calls for the help of Ninhursag, the mother goddess and chief medical officer of the Anunnaki. They enter the house of Shimti, a place whose name translates to the house where the breath of life is breathed in. Modern researchers often interpret this as a laboratory, a secluded facility where the most advanced biological sciences of a spacefaring race were applied to the raw material of Earth. The tablets describe a complex sequence of events. First, a god must be sacrificed. This is often interpreted not as a literal murder for the sake of ritual, but as the sourcing of genetic material. The blood of the god, which the texts say contains the te'ima, or the personality and memory, is mixed with the clay of the earth. In the context of modern science, clay is often seen as a substrate for chemical reactions, and blood is the carrier of the genetic code. By mixing these elements, Ninhursag and Enki are performing what we would today call gene splicing or in vitro fertilization. They are taking the high-level DNA of the Anunnaki and grafting it onto the primitive genome of the terrestrial hominid. The process is not an immediate success. The tablets are remarkably honest about the failures and the ethical ambiguities of this project. They describe a series of prototypes that are born with defects. There are creatures who cannot see, those who cannot hold their limbs, and those who are sterile. This trial and error phase suggests a biological reality rather than a mythological metaphor. It paints a picture of scientists struggling to calibrate the balance between two vastly different species. They need a worker who is intelligent enough to understand instructions and operate tools, yet docile enough to remain subservient. If the creature is too intelligent, it will rebel. If it is too primitive, it is useless in the mines. Finally, after much experimentation, the first successful Lulu is born. The tablets record Ninhursag holding the infant aloft, crying out that her hands have made it. This being is the Adamu, the first of the Lulu Amalu. He is the bridge. He possesses the upright stature and the endurance of the African hominid, but his mind is touched by the divine intellect of his creators. He has the hands of a craftsman and the capacity for language. But there is a crucial limitation placed upon him. The Lulu Amalu is designed to be a worker, and as such, he is initially created without the ability to reproduce. He is a biological tool, meant to be replaced by the next batch of engineered workers. The demand for labor, however, quickly outstrips the capacity of the House of Shimti to produce individual workers. The Anunnaki need a self-sustaining workforce. The tablets describe a second intervention, where the genetic code is modified once again to allow for procreation. This is the moment when the Lulu Amalu transitions from a laboratory experiment to a true species. Enki and Ninhursag oversee the creation of 7 male and 7 female prototypes, who are then used to populate the labor camps of the Abzu and the fields of Sumer. The primitive worker is no longer just a singular creature, it is a population. Presence of the Anunnaki DNA acts as a catalyst for a rapid acceleration of consciousness. They begin to observe their creators, learning their language, their technologies, and their secrets. They are no longer just mindless laborers. They are beings with an emerging sense of self, a growing awareness of the injustice of their position. The documentary record suggests that the transition from the primitive worker to the modern human was not a slow climb through the traditional rungs of evolution, but a sudden leap triggered by this ancient engineering. This narrative forces us to reconsider the missing link in the human fossil record. For decades, paleoanthropologists have searched for the definitive evidence of the transition from the primitive hominid to the modern human, a transition that seems to have happened with startling speed in the Levant and East Africa. If we take the Sumerian tablets at face value, the missing link is not a bone but a laboratory. The Lulu Amalu represents the moment where the natural order of Earth was bypassed by an external intelligence. We are, according to this perspective, a hybrid species born of the Earth but shaped by the stars. The implications of being engineered for a purpose are profound. It suggests that our drive for labor, our obsession with gold, and our hierarchical social structures might be carryovers from our original programming. We were built to serve, to organize, and to extract. Yet, because we were given the blood of our creators, we also inherited their curiosity, their ambition, and their restlessness. The history of the Lulu Amalu is the history of a servant who begins to dream of being a master. It is the story of a species that was never meant to be free, yet found within its own DNA the tools to claim its own destiny. The dust of the Abzu has long since settled, and the Anunnaki have faded into the realm of myth. But if the tablets are correct, the physical evidence of this engineering remains within every cell of our bodies. We are the Lulu Amalu, the mixed ones. We carry the mark of the factory and the spark of the divine in equal measure. As we continue to uncover these ancient texts, the image of our past becomes clearer, revealing a beginning that was not a garden of innocence, but a site of industrial necessity. The story of the primitive worker is not just a tale of the ancient past. It is the blueprint of our present, a reminder that we were created with a purpose, even if that purpose was one we were eventually meant to outgrow. The question that remains is whether we can ever truly transcend the limitations of our design, or if we are forever tethered to the intentions of those who first mixed the clay and the blood in the house of Shimti. The dust settles in the house of Shimti, and the newly fashioned laborers are sent out into the world. In the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, the first cities rise from the silt. For a time, the experiment appears to be a triumph. The canals are dug, the fields are tilled, and the gods, the Anunnaki, enjoy a season of unprecedented leisure. The heavy toil that once sparked a celestial rebellion is now the burden of the atom, the dark-headed people. However, as the centuries pass, the relationship between the creators and the created begins to sour. The tablets describe a shift in the divine atmosphere, moving from the satisfaction of a job well done to a growing, existential irritation. At the heart of this tension stands Enlil, the Lord of the Command and the Supreme Administrator of the Earth. While Enki is the craftsman and the visionary who argued for the creation of humanity, Enlil remains the pragmatist. To Enlil, the humans are not children or even sentient companions. They are a biological technology, a workforce designed for a specific utility. When a tool functions correctly, it is ignored. When a tool begins to interfere with the comfort of its master, it is seen as a defect. The Sumerian records, specifically the Epic of Atrahasis, describe the primary grievance of Enlil with chilling simplicity. It is the noise. The text states that the land filled with people, and the world bellowed like a wild bull. The god Enlil was disturbed by their hubbub. He heard their clamor and addressed the great gods in the assembly. He complained that the noise of mankind had become too intense and that he could no longer sleep. This narrative detail often puzzles modern scholars. Would a race of advanced beings truly seek to exterminate a species because they were too loud? When viewed through a cinematic lens of high-stakes governance, the noise might be a metaphor for something much more destabilizing. It could represent overpopulation, societal chaos, or a growing spirit of human independence that threatened the established divine order. Enlil decides that the human experiment must be corrected, or better yet, terminated. He does not start with a global cataclysm. Instead, the tablets describe a series of targeted, escalating strikes designed to thin the human herd. First comes the plague. Enlil calls upon Namtar, the god of death, to release a pestilence upon the cities. The population begins to wither, but the humans, guided by the secret whispers of Enki, learn how to appease the specific gods responsible for the disease, thereby breaking the cycle of death. Frustrated by this failure, Enlil commands the heavens to withhold their gifts. He orders a great drought. The clouds vanish, and the rains cease. The tablets describe a harrowing period where the soil turns white with salt, and the black fields grow red. Famine grips the earth. For 6 years, the suffering intensifies until, according to the ancient script, parents are forced to consider the unthinkable to survive. Yet, even in this desperation, humanity persists. Enki, the master of the subterranean waters, secretly provides fish and nutrients from the deep, frustrating Enlil's plans once again. The conflict between the two brothers, Enki and Enlil, reaches a breaking point. Enlil realizes that as long as Enki has access to his creations, they will always find a way to survive his decrees. In a high council of the Anunnaki, Enlil demands a final solution. He forces the assembly of the gods to swear a binding oath of secrecy. They will not warn the humans of what is coming. They will allow nature to take its course, or, perhaps, they will trigger a celestial event so massive that no amount of human ingenuity or secret divine coaching can withstand it. This brings us to the most famous and terrifying chapter of the Sumerian record, the Deluge. Unlike the later biblical accounts which frame the flood as a moral judgment against sin, the Sumerian tablets frame it as an administrative decision to resolve a management problem. Enki, though bound by his oath, cannot bear to see his masterpiece wiped from the face of the earth. He finds a loophole. He does not speak directly to his favored human, the king Atrahasis, also known as Ziusadra or Utnapishtim. Instead, Enki speaks to the wall of Atrahasis's reed hut. The scene is evocative of a modern thriller. Enki whispers to the reeds, knowing Atrahasis is listening on the other side. He commands the wall to tear down the house and build a boat. He instructs the human to abandon his possessions and save his life. He gives specific dimensions for a massive vessel, a cube-like structure with 7 decks, designed to withstand the coming fury. Enki provides a cover story for the neighbors, telling Atrahasis to say that Enlil has grown angry with him and he must depart to the Apsu, the watery domain of Enki, to find favor. The tablets then describe the onset of the cataclysm with a terrifying, sensory detail that suggests an eyewitness account. The sun disappears. The sky turns black. The Enzu bird tears the sky with its talons. The gods of the underworld, the Anunnaki, lift up their torches, lighting the land with their radiance. Adad, the storm god, roars across the horizon. The destruction is so complete and so violent that even the gods themselves are horrified. The text describes the great gods cowering like dogs against the outer walls of heaven, weeping as they watch the destruction of the world they helped cultivate. For 7 days and 7 nights the storm rages. The humans, once the noisy laborers of the earth, are now like the spawn of fish, filling the sea. The geography of the world is reshaped in an instant. This was not merely a local river flood. The Sumerian descriptions point toward a planetary upheaval, a moment where the very foundations of the earth were shaken. Whether this was caused by a polar shift, a cometary impact, or a deliberate technological intervention remains one of the greatest mysteries of our ancient past. When the waters finally begin to recede, the boat of Atrahasis comes to rest on the peaks of Mount Nimish. The survivor emerges and immediately offers a sacrifice to the gods. The tablets recount a poignant and somewhat cynical moment. The gods, who have been without food or offerings during the storm, smell the fragrance of the roasting meat and gather around the altar like flies. They realize that in their haste to silence the noise of humanity, they have also destroyed their own supply of sustenance. Enlil arrives and is livid to find that a human has survived. He immediately accuses Enki of betrayal. The confrontation between the brothers is the climax of the divine drama. Enki defends his actions, arguing that instead of a total slaughter, Enlil should have imposed more measured punishments. He suggests that if a person sins, they should pay for their own sin, but the entire race should not be annihilated for the discomfort of the gods. To settle the dispute, a new covenant is established. Humanity will be allowed to continue, but they will no longer be the long-lived, robust laborers of the Golden Age. The gods decide to engineer new limitations into the human design. They introduce the concept of infant mortality. They create different classes of priestesses who will remain celibate to curb the population. Most significantly, they shorten the human lifespan. The era of the god kings, who ruled for tens of thousands of years, comes to an abrupt end. The post-deluge world is a different place. The humans are given the tools of kingship and the structures of civilization, but they are kept at a distance. They are no longer the direct servants walking among the gods in the garden, but subjects of a distant and often demanding divine bureaucracy. The Great Flood serves as the ultimate reset button, a transition from a world of divine engineering to a world of human struggle and religious devotion. The story of the Enlil decree reminds us that, in the eyes of the ancient Sumerian writers, our existence was never guaranteed. We were a project that could be cancelled at any moment. The cataclysm was not a punishment for being bad, but a consequence of being too many and too loud. As we look at the ruins of these ancient cities and the tablets that tell their story, we are forced to wonder about the nature of our own resilience. We are the survivors of a divine purge, the descendants of those who were saved by a whisper through a reed wall. The memory of that water and that storm is etched into the psyche of every civilization that followed, a haunting reminder that the noise of the world can, at any time, be silenced. The dust settles over the alluvial plains, and a new era of documentation begins. In the silent corridors of the British Museum and the shadowed archives of the Louvre, the clay tablets of the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish offer more than mere poetry. They present a technical manual for a biological enterprise. If the deluge was the ultimate reset, then the records that follow are the blueprints of the reconstruction. We are no longer looking at the origin of a soul, but the engineering of a tool. The narrative shifts its focus from the heavens to the earth, specifically to the sweat of the brow and the ache of the limb. In the Sumerian worldview, the gods are not distant abstractions. They are physical, demanding, and, perhaps most importantly, susceptible to exhaustion. The tablets describe a hierarchy of divine beings. At the top are the Anunnaki, the great gods who decree the fates. Below them are the Igigi, a younger generation of deities tasked with the heavy labor of world building. For thousands of years, the Igigi dig the canals, dredge the rivers, and till the soil to sustain the divine appetite. But exhaustion has a breaking point. The cuneiform depicts a scene of ancient industrial strike. The Igigi burn their tools. They surround the dwelling of Enlil, the lord of the storm, and demand relief from their ceaseless toil. It is here, in this moment of divine crisis, that the purpose of the human species is articulated. The solution to the labor dispute is not a compromise, but a replacement. Enki, the master scientist and lord of the deep waters, proposes the creation of a surrogate. He suggests the fashioning of a creature that can bear the yoke of the gods. This creature is the Lulu, the primitive worker. The terminology used in these ancient scripts is chillingly precise. The word Lulu does not imply a being of divine grace or spiritual destiny. It translates more closely to one who is mixed or a confused one. It describes a hybrid. To create this being, the tablets say Enki and the mother goddess Ninmah do not simply wave a hand and summon life from the void. They engage in a process that sounds remarkably like a laboratory procedure. They require raw materials. They require a template. And they require a spark of the very essence they intend to serve. The texts detail the sacrifice of a minor god, often identified as Weila or Kingu. It is said that he has the personality or the intelligence necessary for the task. His blood is mixed with the clay of the earth. In the context of modern understanding, this imagery of blood and earth takes on a different hue. If we strip away the mythological language, we are left with the description of a biological merger. The clay is the terrestrial matter, the indigenous hominid that already roams the Mesopotamian wilds. The blood of the god is the genetic code, the instructions, and the intelligence of the extraterrestrial architects. The result is a living cipher, a biological machine designed to bridge the gap between the wild world and the divine requirements of the city-state. The documentary lens focuses on the physical attributes of this new creation. The Sumerians emphasized the hands. The human hand, with its opposable thumb and fine motor control, is the perfect instrument for the tasks the Igigi abandoned. We are designed to hold the shovel, to guide the plow, and to carry the basket. Our endurance, our ability to work under the heat of the Mesopotamian sun for hours on end, is not a biological accident but a specified requirement. We are engineered for utility. Our very anatomy is a reflection of the work we were meant to perform. However, the creation process is not depicted as an immediate success. The tablets describe a series of trials and errors, a sequence of biological misfires that Ninmah and Enki produce before achieving the final model. They describe beings with internal organs that do not function, creatures that cannot hold their water, and beings that lack the capacity for speech or reproduction. These are not the whimsical monsters of later Greek myth. They read like the casualties of a high-stakes genetic experiment. Each failure is scrutinized and discarded until the perfect balance is found. The final product must be intelligent enough to follow complex instructions and maintain the infrastructure of the gods, but not so intelligent that it recognizes its own servitude or gains the immortality of its creators. This balance of intelligence and limitation is the core of the human utility. We are given the gift of language, not so we may debate the nature of the universe, but so we may receive orders. We are given the gift of social organization, not for our own flourishing, but to mobilize large-scale labor forces. The Sumerian tablets describe the Me, a set of divine decrees or universal laws that govern every aspect of human civilization. These Me are often interpreted as physical objects, tablets or discs that Enki keeps in his city of Eridu. They are the software of civilization. They contain the instructions for weaving, for metalworking, for kingship, and for the priesthood. Without the Me, the human tool is incomplete. We are a hardware system that requires the divine operating system to function. As we observe the ruins of Uruk and Eridu, the scale of the labor becomes apparent. These were not the organic growths of a nomadic people settling down. These were planned urban environments designed to funnel resources to the temples, which served as the administrative hubs for the Anunnaki. The human population was the engine of this economy. We were the gatherers, the builders, and the maintainers. The tablets do not speak of human rights or individual liberty. They speak of quotas, of rations, and of the necessity of keeping the noise of the human masses to a minimum so the gods can sleep. The concept of the living cipher extends into the very nature of our mortality. The text suggests that death was a feature, not a bug, of the human design. If the Lulu were to live as long as the Anunnaki, the earth would soon be overrun, and the hierarchy would be threatened. By capping the human lifespan, the architects ensured a constant turnover of the workforce, a steady supply of fresh energy that would never accumulate enough wisdom or power to challenge the creators. We are a self-replicating tool with a built-in expiration date. Yet, there is a paradox in the Sumerian account. While we were engineered for utility, the inclusion of the divine blood, the essence of the god Wiyala, granted us a spark that the architects may not have fully controlled. This spark is the source of our restlessness, our creativity, and our persistent belief that we are meant for something more than the yoke. It is the ghost in the machine. The Sumerian scribes seem to recognize this tension. They describe how the gods eventually grow frustrated with the noise of humanity. This noise is not just the sound of many voices. It is the chaotic, unpredictable energy of a biological experiment that has begun to evolve beyond its initial parameters. In the quiet of the archaeological sites, Where the wind whips through the crumbling mud bricks, the reality of this utility feels visceral. Every irrigation ditch, every foundation stone of a ziggurat is a testament to the purpose for which we were supposedly fashioned. We see ourselves in these ancient records not as the protagonists of a grand spiritual drama, but as the sophisticated instruments of an older, more cynical power. The utility of our species was to provide for those who could not or would not provide for themselves. The tablets suggest that our civilization is not our own. Our agriculture, our laws, our mathematics, and our very biological makeup were handed down as part of a service contract. We were deciphered from the wild and recoded into the servants of the city. As we peel back the layers of the Sumerian past, we are forced to confront a difficult question. If our original purpose was to be a living cipher, a tool for the gods, have we ever truly moved beyond that utility? Or have we simply traded one set of masters for another, still operating within the parameters of a blueprint written in the dawn of time? The narrative of the engineered human is a dark mirror held up to our species. It challenges the notion of progress and replaces it with the concept of refinement. We are not getting better, we are getting more efficient. The legacy of the Anunnaki is not just in the ruins of Iraq, but in the very structure of our societies and the double helix of our DNA. We are the products of an ancient industry, a biological workforce that has forgotten its employer but continues to fulfill the terms of its employment. The search for the living cipher is ultimately a search for our own function in a universe that may have viewed us as nothing more than a temporary solution to a divine problem. As the sun sets over the desert, casting long shadows across the mounds of buried history, the observational eye turns toward the stars from which these architects supposedly descended. If we were engineered for a purpose, that purpose remains etched into the fabric of our existence, a silent code waiting for the day we finally learn to read our own instructions. The Sumerian tablets do not just tell us where we came from, they tell us what we were made for. And in that realization, the cinematic grandeur of our history takes on a haunting, mechanical precision. We are the labor, we are the tool, and we are the cipher. The story of humanity, when viewed through the lens of the Mesopotamian scribes, is a chronicle of utility. From the first drop of divine blood spilled into the clay to the vast metropolitan grids of the modern world, the pattern holds firm. We are a species defined by what we can do, what we can produce, and how well we can serve the systems that sustain us. The gods may have departed, or they may simply be observing from the periphery, but the machinery they set in motion continues to turn, powered by the sweat and the ingenuity of the Lulu, the primitive worker who became the master of the world. The exploration of these ancient texts reveals a species that is perpetually working, perpetually building, and perpetually seeking the approval of a higher authority. It is a drive that seems to be hard-coded into our nature. We are the living cipher, a complex arrangement of biological data performing a task we no longer understand, for masters we no longer remember. The silence of the ruins is not the silence of an empty world, but the silence of a factory floor after the shift has ended, waiting for the next command to echo through the halls of history. As the segment concludes, the focus remains on the artifacts, the small clay cylinders and tablets that contain these explosive revelations. They are the keys to a door we are only now beginning to unlock. To understand our utility is to understand our origin. And to understand our origin is to realize that the history of humanity is not a story of accidental evolution, but a story of intentional design. We were never meant to be the masters. We were meant to be the means. And in that truth lies the most profound mystery of our existence. The transition from the wild to the city was not an escape. but an induction. We were brought into the fold of civilization to serve a grander architecture, one that required the unique combination of divine intelligence and terrestrial endurance that only the human hybrid could provide. This is the legacy of the Sumerian tablets, a record of our species as a calculated addition to the planetary ecosystem, a living tool designed to perform the labor of the gods. As we look at the world we have built, we must wonder if we are fulfilling our design, or if we are finally beginning to write a code of our own. The segment fades on the image of a single cuneiform sign, the symbol for man, which carries within its strokes the history of 1 billion burdens and the potential for 1 billion more. The utility of the human species is the thread that runs through every civilization, a constant in an ever-changing world, a testament to the enduring power of the architects who first mixed the clay and the blood in the shadows of the beginning. We remain, as we have always been, the living cipher, deciphering our own existence one task at a time.